So this solution that the Jews should return to their homeland, Zionism, was a fringe group that had very little support at the end of the 1800s. Nevertheless, it was a solution to the anti-Semitism they were facing.
The leaders that we had at the time, were the leadership the same mindset? Was there unity amongst the Arabs of any kind?
The British were carving up the Middle East. They'd reached out to Sharif Hussein. They'd reached out to the Sauds. They'd reached out to all the tribes that went on to become the Gulf nations. And the understanding was, if you support us in what we're doing, we will reward you with your own nations afterwards. And America sees a problem in the Middle East. What America sees is strategic location, loss of oil. And what they see is the problem is all the architecture being created by Britain.
Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Salatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh, and welcome to Islamic Oasis Live. Dear brothers and sisters, obviously I don't think there's anyone, at least Muslims, that's not following what's happening in Gaza and what's happening in general in the region. There is a lot to learn. There's a lot. Everything is move. The whole region is volatile, and you never know what could happen. It's almost like a powder keg. Different nations are making different moves. Of course, Israel itself and then the surrounding countries are worried about their own governments. You never know what is possible in the next month, 2 months, 3 months. Things are very, very fragile in the Middle East at this point. And they should be, because of the kind of crimes that are being committed in Gaza. But the question that we get asked a lot by a lot of our viewers, students, university students, Muslims, not Muslims, how did this all begin? Why is this conflict such a bloody conflict? Why is this so important to the Muslims? And, the role of Jerusalem in general, the role of Masjid al-Aqsa and all of this. So to discuss this in detail, all the way from the inception of Israel in 1948 and where we are today and where we're going to go, inshallah. To discuss this, we brought, of course, our brother Adnan Khan. Many of you know Adnan Khan very well. Adnan Khan is a political analyst, author, activist, founder of the Geopolity, the website. He has written extensively on international issues for over 2 decades in areas such as economics, political Islam, energy, defense, and the Middle East in general. He has authored several books and is the author of Global Trends for the 21st Century and 100 Years of the Middle East. Brother Adnan, welcome to Islamic Oasis.
Salam to you all. It's good to be here once again.
Sheikh, let's begin with this. Obviously, as the conflict rages on, people are talking about what's happening in the region, where did this conflict began, and everything that's around it. So, from what we understand is that, Israel was established 1948. Can you give us the background? How did this state come into being? When did this? How did this all come to be that we are seeing what we are seeing today?
Okay, so we can probably break this down into 2 or 3 sections. You've got in 1948, Israel came to existence. So you've got the period from 1917 to 1948, which was British mandated Palestine, which was a military occupation. And then you've got the period before that. The creation of Israel really begins at the end of the 1800s. So there's not a long history per se. And what you find is, what's the context at the time? The context is there's a lot of Jews who live in Europe. Jews have been in Europe for a long time. And the Jews are persecuted, the Europeans are anti-Semitic. There's a reason why the Inquisition and the Holocaust happened in Europe and in no other place. Because the Europeans were absolutely racist. They hated Jews and they looked down upon Jews. So near the end of the 1800s, you've got new nations emerging, you've got nationalism emerging, you've got the British and the French, they've got their eyes on the Ottoman territories in the Middle East. They're looking to carve up that region. So some Jews came to the conclusion that the only salvation for the Jewish people, the anti-Semitism that they're facing, is they should also get their own nation as well. So the Balkans, they were emerging with their nations. You had the Armenians, people from Azerbaijan, Persians, they were having their own nations. So some Jews, and this is very few Jews, they thought that the best solution for them in the long run is that they have their own nation. Now, this was quite a deviant view amongst the majority of Jews. We as Muslims, if I meet a black Muslim, if I meet a white Muslim, we're all Muslims, we're one ummah. Where we're from doesn't matter. Jews didn't view themselves like that. Jews viewed themselves as, we're Jews, we have some beliefs and practices, but we're Europeans, we're from Asia, we're from Africa. Those identities were more important than the fact that they were Jews. So that's why there were Arab Jews in Palestine, been there for a very long time, very small in number, but they were completely different people to the European Jews. They didn't see themselves as one people. So the European Jews, so when this idea was proposed, many Jews were against it. In fact, the European Jews wanted to be recognized as Europeans. They wanted to integrate and be part of England. They wanted to be part of France. They wanted to be part of Russia. They wanted to be part of Poland. But because the people were so racist, so anti-Semitic, they needed a solution. So this solution that the Jews should return to their homeland, Zionism, was a fringe group that had very little support at the end of the 1800s. Nevertheless, it was a solution to the anti-Semitism they were facing. Now, what happened was the British were carving up the Middle East. They'd reached out to Sharif Hussein. They'd reached out to the Sauds. They'd reached out to all the tribes that went on to become the Gulf nations. And the understanding was, if you support us in what we're doing, we will reward you with your own nations afterwards. So famously, Sharif Hussein was told, you will get your own state from Turkey all the way down to Yemen. So he collaborated with Britain and engaged in what was known as the Arab Revolt, right? So the Jews saw this and they're like, okay, let's go to the British and let's say we want a nation as well. But if you want a nation, what are you going to give to Britain in return? So they needed to do what the Arab leaders were doing, which is, if you give us our nation, we will protect your interests and we will be an outpost for you in the Middle East. So famously, when some rich and powerful Jews wrote to the British in 1917, the same year Britain militarily occupied Palestine, they did the Balfour Declaration that Britain views the Jewish demand favorably and it will work with the Jews to establish a place for them, their homeland. So actually quite a few proposals were made: Uganda, Argentina, and Palestine. Now remember, the support for this was very, very amongst the Jews. The Jews wanted to stay in Europe. They wanted to be recognized in Europe. Yeah. So what these wealthy Jews did is they got in touch with the British and they got a favorable response in what was known as the Balfour Declaration. That the British, they support their demand or their want for a nation, that Britain looks favorably upon this. So in the same year that was written, 1917, that was the year Britain came to militarily occupy Palestine. So once World War II finished, the victors set up the League of Nations. And I mean, this is just so funny. They set up the League of Nations and surprise, surprise, the League of Nations gave them a mandate to run these countries. So they set up an organization and the organization gave them the mandate that, oh, these people, they don't know how to run these places, so you need to help them run these places. Interestingly, Britain the promise they made to Sharif Hussein, they did a U-turn on that. They did give him a whole Arab land from Turkey down to Yemen. And he created such a problem that they sidelined him and they created two new countries for his sons. So Abdullah was given Transjordan and Faisal was given Iraq. I mean, these are completely fake nations, literally just picked out of it. I mean, Transjordan, there's never been people residing in Jordan. It's just desert land. You have some nomads there. Like, if you were to ask me today, what does it mean to be a Jordanian? There literally is no history. Jordan was part of Al-Sham. Then eventually they gave the Saud family Saudi Arabia, and then the Gulf nations got their own nations as well. Palestine, Britain didn't give to anybody. It ran it as a military outpost themselves. So from 1917, in 1917, there was at most 10,000 or so Jews living in Palestine. So these were mostly Arab Jews who had been there for a long time. So the Jewish population was very small. The Muslims obviously were overwhelming in number. And remember, Islam came to Palestine in 629. And Islam was the system of rule there from 629 until 1917, minus 88 years in the 12th century when Saladin Ayyubi liberated it. So really for over a millennia, Muslims ruled over this territory, and Jews, Muslims and Christians lived side by side together. So what Britain did when it occupied is they started to deliver on their promise to the Jews. What Britain did is it facilitated the migration of Jews from Europe to Palestine. So originally, when the European Jews started to arrive, the Muslims didn't necessarily see them as a problem. They're coming, they're buying up land, they want to live here. And again, historically, Muslims have never had a problem with Jews or Christians in most of the territories that we lived in. But obviously, slowly, the Jewish population started to increase, and it became obvious to the Muslims in Palestine that these guys aren't here to live and farm and do business. They're here for other stuff. They seem to be getting more and more aggressive. And actually, there was a lot of tension and breakout of violence between the two groups. Remember, Theodor Herzl, the founder of the Zionist movement, he even approached Sultan Abdul Hamid in the early 1900s. And he said, I want to buy Palestine. And, Sultan Abdul Hamid first told him, on your bike, it's not for sale. If you want to come and live there as individuals, not a problem. But this agenda you've got of taking over, that's something completely different. So from 1917 to 1948, Britain facilitated the arrival of European Jews. This led to a lot of tension. In 1930, the tension got, because remember, there were some Jewish groups that were against the British. They used to fight British forces that were there. The Muslims were unhappy as well. So in 1938, the British set up a commission called the Peel Commission to look at this. There were problems, there was violence, and also the Muslims had carried out a strike for 6 months. The Peel Commission concluded that these two peoples cannot live together.
This is called what commission again? This is
the Peel, P-E-E-L, Peel Commission. It's named after a civil servant. And that was the first time the proposal of partitioning Palestine was proposed. Nobody agreed. The Palestinians didn't agree with it, and neither did the Jews as well. But it was put out there that this is actually a solution. Once the Holocaust became public, 1944, 1945, even more Jews turned up in bigger numbers. They've just been massacred, genocide really, in Europe. So really, very quickly, we went from 10,000 Jews to where we got to 500,000 Jews in about 30 years. The tensions were boiling over. Then on the 14th of May, 1948, the British mandate was going to come to an end. And what the British did was they packed up and they left. They left the mess that they had created. They left the mess that they had facilitated. The 14th of May, 1948, they packed up and left. That evening, David Ben-Gurion announced the creation and the first day of Israel. But before that, the League of Nations, the United Nations was established in 1947. They looked at the problem as well, and they said that the land needs to be partitioned. And they actually said about 50% should go to the Jews, and the other should go to the Palestinians. The bit that got to the Palestinians was the West Bank, was Gaza, a few other areas. Nobody stuck to this plan. The British got up and left. And remember, the Jews weren't just migrants. Amongst them, you had armed groups. You had terrorist groups. You had groups that hated the British. You had other groups that worked with the British as well. But there's a question here now. At most, there was 500,000 Jews. The Muslims numbered 2 or 3 million in Palestine, and even more millions in the region. So how on earth did 500,000 people come and establish themselves there when they're completely outnumbered? And unfortunately, what we got to keep into account here is after World War I, most of the rulers were rulers because Britain created countries for them and put them into power. For Abdullah of Transjordan, Faisal of Iraq, in Egypt, you had a monarchy which was Britain put there. In Saudi hadn't existed. It came in the 1930s. Britain had put them into power. So these countries weren't interested in going to war over Palestine because that's a British interest. And actually, they're more concerned about their national interest. So what happened in the end, because the creation of Israel was such a big event, what most of these countries did is they sent volunteers to go and fight. They didn't send their armies. So Gamal Abdel Nasser, in his biography, he actually talks about how disappointed he was with King Farouk of Egypt. That when they went to war in Palestine in 1948, when they got across Gaza, he realized there's no preparation, there's no arms, there's no equipment, there's no nothing. And apparently he said that was when he decided he was going to do a coup and overthrow the regime, which he did in 1953 later. So Egypt, which was the most powerful country in the region, they just sent some volunteers. Jordan, we have to keep in mind that Abdullah and Faisal of Jordan and Iraq, these people were at university with the founders of the Zionist movement in Istanbul in the 1920s. They'd been talking to David Ben-Gurion, they'd been collaborating. They were just like, look, as long as we can have the east of the Jordan River, you can have whatever you want on the other side. So they were more than happy to sell out Palestine as long as they got Jordan, as long as they got their land. And again, all they did was they sent token volunteers. So the reason why the Zionists were able to establish a state and were able to survive is really the contribution by the Arab rulers was absolutely minimal. And secondly, all these countries I mentioned, Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, the rulers were very weak. They weren't really united. As a result, there was no united response to Palestine. There were individual responses, largely volunteers. And that's why, because the numbers don't add up. We're 10 million plus people in the region, they're 500,000. Like, the numbers don't add up. But the reason why it happened is those numbers weren't used to the advantage that they were. They didn't make use of them. What they did was send volunteers, whilst the Zionists had state-of-arms equipment. They had imported them in from Czechoslovakia. They had been preparing for this day. Their whole plan was, we are going to this territory, we are going to seize the territory, and we're going to expel the indigenous people. We don't want to live with the people. In fact, their aim from day one, which I'm sure we're going to discuss, they wanted the whole of Palestine. They don't want to share Palestine at all. So, but obviously 1948 was the beginning. So that's how things started, and that's how we unfortunately got to 1948.
So Sheikh, this, so now you have 1948. So, I mean, the role of, so we talked about, so what was Balfour Declaration, Sheikh? You had the British mandate. All
so
of this
Balfour,
yeah.
So the Balfour Declaration was a response to a letter received from Walter Rothschild, one of the leading influential Jews.
Yeah.
So effectively, the Zionist movement had made a decision, we need our nation. So what they did was they started then to turn to influential Jews in Europe. And interestingly, the influential Jews looked down upon these Jews. They looked down upon their own people, that these guys are backward. But what the Rothschild did is he was the one that wrote the letter to the British government. And the Balfour Declaration was their response to the letter. And the letter was, we want a homeland, we will support you. So the Balfour Declaration is, yeah, we got your letter. And yeah, we agree with you, and we will do whatever we can to support you in your goal to get a nation. And then that year, Britain military occupied Palestine. So they now ruled over the territory where they had promised the Jews a land, they had promised Sharif Hussein the land, they had promised the Saudis the land as well in the region. So Britain was promising everybody. Yeah, but they delivered to the Saudis, they delivered to Sharif Hussein's sons, and they delivered to the Jews. So effectively, what the British did in summary, they took someone else's land and they promised it to someone else. But they didn't give them a place in Britain. They didn't give them a place in Europe. They didn't even give them a place in their colony. What they did was they took somebody else's land and said, yeah, we'll give it to you.
Because they didn't want them there, Sheikh. I mean, let me ask you this, Sheikh. This whole idea that, the background of the Jews as far as being wealthy, very, sophisticated. I mean, if this was all the case, why didn't the Europeans want them in Europe? They would actually help them develop Europe.
Look, you had some information. Most Jews really were at the bottom of society. People hated them. People were anti-Semitic. Look, you had the Spanish Inquisition, 1500s, where they carried out a genocide against Muslims and Jews. You had the Holocaust. There's a reason why this happened in Europe only, not anywhere else. The Europeans historically hated Jews. The Christians never recognized them. When Umar ibn Khattab conquered or was given the keys of Jerusalem, it was run by the Christians. And he said to the Christian priest who gave him the keys, "Where are the Jews?" And they'd kicked out the Jews. That's what the Christians always did. They'd kicked out the Jews from Jerusalem. That's the history of these guys. That's why it's not surprising. Now, your Rothschilds and other influential Jews, they lived a separate life altogether. Their life was not the same as most Jews. Most Jews, unfortunately, were, like immigrants today. They were at the bottom of society, had the worst jobs. They did the job that nobody else wanted to do. Your Rothschilds and your other influential Jewish families, they lived a completely different life. And that's the thing. I mentioned, wherever you're from as a Muslim, we're one ummah. Doesn't matter what nationality you are. Our deen is our identity. The Jews are the opposite. The land they're from is their identity, and they happen to be Jews. So that's why a black Jew, an Australian Jew, a European Jew, a Spanish Jew, an Arab Jew, they don't see themselves as the same. They see it as, we practice the same faith, but their loyalty and their identity is by the land they're from. So that's why you had the Ashkenazi Jews, European Jews, and the Arab Jews, they're completely different. So the European Jews, the Zionists, they established a land in Palestine. And the Arab Jews that were there, they discriminate against them today, and they don't even view themselves as Jews like them. And that's why you find Israeli politics is very divided today between left, right, Orthodox, unorthodox, right wing, left wing. Their politics is very divided. But what they present this image that we're Jews, we were persecuted, so we have a right to this land. But the Jews are not united like that. So you've got Jews today who disagree with the whole concept of Israel.
Sheikh, where does the political class of Israel comes from? So you're talking, they are Europeans. They are not from there.
Yeah, the Europeans. So the Zionists who established Israel were European Jews. Yeah. So European Jews that were persecuted, that were victims, and this is Europe. That's what Europe was like. Europe persecuted them. So it was these people, European Jews, who then migrated and seized the land. So there were already Jews there in Palestine, but they're Arab Jews. They were different than European Jews. So Zionism was a European Jewish project. Yeah, it wasn't an Arab Jewish project. It wasn't an African Jewish project. It wasn't an Asian Jewish project. It was European Jews. And the reason why, there's two main things. One is they were persecuted. And secondly, what the British did, is if you look at when Britain carved out the Middle East after World War I, the British, generally what they did with the French, they would put minorities in power. So they were weak and they would always need them. So how did the Alawis get into power in Syria? Right. There's such a small number.
2%.
The Alawis in power. Why was there a Sunni monarchy in Iraq when the majority of people were Shia? Why in Saudi Arabia you got so many tribes? Why is the Saud tribe from Riyadh in power? That's the British and French tactic. You get weak leaders, weak tribes, and you put them into power because then they will always be beholden to you. You don't put a strong tribe into power. So they saw it as, the Jews have got a demand. That demand we can use for what we're doing. And so they have no love for the Jews, and we know that from their history. But what they saw is we can use their plight for our advantage. If that wasn't the case, the Jews would never have gone to Palestine. They would never have gone. So they realized, if you want your homeland, one of the powers has to support you. So you had the French, you had the British, and you had the emerging America. And they went to all of them. So they went to Sultan Abdul Hamid first, and he said, on your bike. They went to the French, but they didn't get much support. They went to the British, and then after that, they went to America, where they found a lot of support amongst the evangelical Christians who still support them today.
Yeah.
That's why you don't have to be Jewish to be a Zionist. In fact, most Zionists are not even Jewish. Well, Zionism is nationalism for the Jews. Yeah, Judaism has always existed. You've got a wide spectrum. And that's why Zionism is a relatively modern thing. If you look at the 2,000-3,000 year history of the Jews, Zionism is one little dot, and it's a modern day development. For most of their history, there's never been Zionism. There's never been nationalist aspirations by Jews. Jews historically lived with Muslims, with Europeans, with other people. And they saw it like that. They saw it as, no, we don't want our homeland. We want to be seen as European. So we do have to separate here between Judaism and Zionism. It's not necessarily the same thing. And that's important, because what Israel does, they link these all together. That if you disagree with the state of Israel, that means you hate Jews. They're completely different things. Very, very different. And that's why Noam Chomsky, Norman Finkelstein, these are Jews and they're completely anti-Israel.
Sheikh, what is the main difference between, let's say, the British Mandate and Balfour Declaration?
So the Balfour Declaration was just a declaration by the British Foreign Minister at the time that we support Jewish aspirations for their own nation. And because we're the British Empire, we have colonies everywhere, we will help you in achieving your aspiration. So it's just a declaration, doesn't mean anything.
So that's
Balfour Declaration. Yeah, that's the Balfour Declaration. The mandate is Britain physically runs a territory. So the mandate of Palestine was British forces, British civil servants. They will govern Palestine. So because they were running Palestine, they were able to facilitate Jews arriving there. If Britain was not running Palestine, how would Jews have gone there? No, they would have let them in. Whoever the leader was, he wouldn't have let them in.
So now we go, well, look, so before that, there's also now, I think 1919 was it, you had the Sykes-Picot.
Yeah.
So, and this is the French doing, it seems.
Yeah, so the Sykes-Picot agreement, so we find out about the Sykes-Picot agreement during World War I. What happened is the Russians, the Russian Tsar collapsed. And when it collapsed, government ministries were overrun by the revolutionaries in Russia. When they overran the foreign ministry, they found a number of documents which talked about carving up the Middle East amongst Russia, amongst Britain, amongst France, amongst Italy. So during the war, they were already talking which territories of the Ottoman they're going to carve up and take. So because Russia collapsed, that's how it became public. So what that showed is the French, the British, the Italians, and the Russians were already talking during World War I of carving up the Middle East. Because what some people argue, because the Ottomans collapsed, the British had to do something with their lands. So Britain created countries. No, they were plotting this beforehand. That was what was going on there. So Armenia, that area, Russia was going to take. Italy was going to get Istanbul and parts of Turkey. France was going to take Syria, Lebanon, which it did. And everything below Syria, the British were going to take. And what Britain did, that agreement largely was implemented. So that was a secret agreement of what they planned to do after World War I. Remember, they didn't carve up Germany. World War I was really Germany versus France versus Britain and versus Russia. They didn't carve up Germany. They created some states, but most of Germany remained in place. But remember, many empires collapsed during World War I. The Austro-Hungary Empire, the Ottomans, many different, the whole border of Europe. So what you find is all this scheming, all these deals, double deals, this was the British way. So the Brits were not dogmatic who they work with. They would promise you something, they stab you in the back. That's what they were doing. And unfortunately, because the Ottomans were in decline, what you find is, unfortunately, many of the Arab tribes started to collaborate with Britain against the Ottomans. Because Britain promised them, we'll give you your own land. And because Britain was the empire, these tribal leaders like the Sauds, like the Gulf leaders, and then Sharif Hussein, they thought they would personally benefit from it. And that's how Israel was able to come about, because the leaders around Palestine were collaborating with the power of the day. And it's the same reason why we lost Palestine during the Crusades. The European Christians came and they collaborated with the petty Islamic Muslim rulers. So Saladin Ayyubi, he had to defeat those rulers first. Once he defeated them, he cut the supply line to the Crusader state. and then he defeated them. So the Crusader state, the modern version of that is Israel. It's a European outpost. It's a Western outpost in the Middle East. That's what the Crusader state was back in the day.
Subhanallah. So 1948 happens. The state is recognized. I guess it was, what's it, Roosevelt? Woodrow Wilson. Okay, I think it was. The one who...
Woodrow Wilson. So then you had, what's his name? So, I mean, it's quite interesting what happened. So when Israel came about, you had the emergence of America as a global power. And some countries recognized Israel straight away, some didn't. Right? So amongst the Muslim world, Turkey recognized it straight away. The Arab rulers took their time.
I wonder why that is, Sheikh. Turkey right away, why? Because of Ataturk being in power, and that's what he wanted.
Well, Ataturk had passed away then, but he's number two, they wanted to see themselves as a modern nation. So they saw it as, if the West is doing something, we're in bed with them. We want to support the West. That was the Ataturk strategy. That was his descendants' strategy as well. America was interesting. America's view was, we want to have good relations with the Arab countries. There's a lot of oil in the Middle East. America wants good relationship with the Sauds, with the Gulf leaders, with Iran. And they knew supporting Israel would be a problem. On the other hand, Israel is this new nation. And also, remember, Israel was a creation of Britain. The Americans didn't necessarily look favorably towards Israel. The only problem is Zionists from Israel had traveled to America and got a lot of support from the Christian evangelicals. So supporting Israel became a domestic political issue. If you want the support of the evangelical Christians, you need to support Israel. So what you find is there was actually quite a lot of division within America over this. However, because America was an emerging power, Britain was more influential. When Israel announced its independence and creation, the wartime leader, it wasn't Woodrow Wilson, the American president, he supported it, and the whole State Department that was at the UN, they resigned en masse. Because they saw this against American interests at the time. They saw that this would go against our relationship with the Arab rulers. So from the early creation of Israel, Britain supported them. All the Zionists were European, working with Britain. America was still an emerging power. And obviously it had survived. And America thought, events have gone beyond us now, so we might as well just accept it, which they did. But at that time, as the 1950s come about, American influence over Israel was zero. The Israeli politicians were more close to Britain and France because they had facilitated it. And Israel's main challenge was, you've come into existence, you've got this small nation, you're surrounded by Arab rulers and Muslims. So Israel's main concern is, although we exist, our long-term survivability, there is a massive question mark. You're a weak nation, you have a weak economy, all the oil is not in Israel, it's somewhere else. So that was their main concern at that period. And then what changed for them was the beginning of the Cold War. As the Cold War started, America was worried that the Soviet Union is trying to spread communism into the Middle East. So what America said by the time Dwight Eisenhower came to power was that anyone who supports the West against communism, America will build your defenses, America will build military bases, and America will defend you. The last thing America wanted was communist expansion into the Middle East where all the oil is. But Israel thought, perfect. We got no military, we got no equipment. The fastest way for us to develop is to join America in its Cold War. So by 1958, Israel became the linchpin of America's Cold War in the Middle East. So that's when America started arming Israel, it started developing its military industry. Take America out of the equation, the long-term survivability of Israel is still in question. Israel's got Egypt, you've got Jordan, you've got Syria, these are much bigger countries. But in 1956, Israel went to war with France and Britain against Egypt over the Suez Canal nationalization. And when they went to war, America and the Soviet Union forced them out. They forced them out of Egypt.
So that was 1967?
No, that's 58. That was the first one, the Suez Canal crisis. So at that time, America and Israel's relationship wasn't what it is like we know now. At that point, as far as America's concerned, we've got a communist threat. And why on earth has the Israelis gone to war with Egypt, with the French and the British? So they forced them and threatened them to get out of Egypt, which they did. Right? That had actually happened at that time. So what that shows you, the geography wasn't in Israel's favor. Economically, Israel had many challenges. How are you going to fulfill your security needs when you lack the economic base, you lack the population size, and you're surrounded by enemies? So they realize, unless a superpower supports you, you won't survive. And at that time, the superpower was shifting from Britain over to America. So they realized we need to join America in the Cold War. That is the only way we're going to survive. If you support America in the Cold War, America will then arm you, which they did in time.
So now we have 1958. Then 1967 occurs. But Sheikh, these gaps that we have between, 58, you're talking about almost a 10-year gap again. So in these gaps, of course, there's massacres happening. I guess 1948, 49, there's already Sabra Shatila. Then there is Deir Yassin, the first one. And then, the Arab rulers are not with the Muslims in Palestine from day one. And then the Muslims.
So what the Arab rulers are doing is they make speeches in support of Palestine. They say they support Palestine. Yeah, from day one. So, for example, Gamal Abdel Nasser, he didn't just support Palestine, he was actually even arming some of the proxy groups against Israel. So in Gaza, for example, famously, he was arming obviously, Israel looks at the region and they look at who the enemies are. Gamal Abdel Nasser does a coup in 1953, and he wants to be the regional power. You've got in Syria, they want to be the regional power. So you've got this competition brewing. So what Israel sees is you've got this revolutionary leader in Egypt, Nasser. He's talking about completely reshaping the region, and he's taken an anti-Israeli position. So straight away, the politics is Egypt versus Israel. And Israel's worried. Egypt's a powerful country, much bigger population, and this Nasser has the ability to unify the whole Arab world against Israel. Right? And so this is what eventually led to the 1967 war. What Israel realized...
One more question. 1967, the leaders that we had at the time, were they... if you look at the situation now, you have Erdogan, you have Abdullah, you have Sisi, you have, all these different... were the leadership the same mindset? Was there unity amongst the Arabs of any kind, or was...
No. So what you had was a couple of things going on at the time. You firstly had quite weak leaders emerge. You've got Nasser done a coup in Egypt. In Syria, you've got a regime. In Jordan, you've got a monarchy. So they're more concerned about strengthening themselves domestically.
Because Syria was going... There's coups happening over and over within Syria
I think
at that time.
1940. So this is the thing, the 50s and the 60s, you had coup after coup, counter coup. So in Syria...
how many? 7 or 8, 9, or maybe 17?
So I think Hosni Zaim, he overthrew, I think it was 1950, he did a coup, and he lasted only 6 months.
Yeah.
Until a counter coup was done against him.
Yeah.
The monarchy in Iraq was overthrown in 1958, and there was about 3 or 4 coups within 6-7 years.
But these coups are these are the international powers trying to figure out who's going to be in control, or is it actually people have realized something and said,
no. Unfortunately, most of this, what you find is World War II's ended, Britain's bankrupt. Britain created the Middle East in the previous war, World War I. And what Britain's doing is it's realizing we're no longer the power, and America's emerging. And America sees a problem in the Middle East. What America sees is strategic location, loss of oil. And what they see is the problem is all the architecture being created by Britain. I was reading the other day, I think there was 12 or 13 nations Britain and France created in the Middle East. Only 2 were not monarchies. All the others were monarchies. Look at the Gulf, look at Saudi, look at Iran, look at Egypt. All these were monarchies. Right? I think Yemen and Turkey were the only ones that weren't monarchies. So what America concluded is unless you remove these rulers who are loyal to Britain, there's no other way you're going to get your foot into the region. Because these rulers will then obviously work with Britain, they will serve Britain's agenda. So America from the beginning had its eyes on Egypt, Iraq, and Syria. These were the three powers in the region. That was who they had their eyes on. And, you know, CIA operatives wrote books in the 60s and the 70s that they brought Gamal Abdel Nasser to power, that his anti-Israel, anti-America, that was part of the strategy. To win the support on the Arab street, you needed to be anti-Israel and anti-American. Right? In fact, unfortunately, Sheikh, our most anti-American leaders in history eventually turn out to be the biggest agents for America. That's why
you had what's his name before Bashar al-Assad, his father Assad.
Hafiz al-Assad.
Hafiz al-Assad. So he was, I mean, at least he came out to be very anti-American.
So
you had the guy in
Libya.
Libya.
If someone is very anti a country, we should question that. Because we've seen in our history the most anti-American turned out to be the American agents. The most anti-British turned out to be British agents in the end. It's part of their cover that they actually do that. But the agenda America had for Egypt was they wanted to remove Britain from Egypt, and they wanted to use Egypt as a launch pad to the wider region. This was the role of Nasser. His job was to challenge and undermine all the pro-British rulers in the region. That was his role, right? And he actually did that quite successfully. The anti-Israeli stuff was just to get support. The plan was never for him to go to war with Israel. His job was to challenge the Jordanian leader, to challenge the Iranian leadership, to challenge all the other countries in the region, because all of them were British monarchies. So eventually what you find is there was a lot of tit for tat between Nasser and Israel. The Israelis were never happy that Nasser was arming people in Gaza. The French were never happy that Nasser was arming people in Algeria. And Nasser did this stuff because he was trying to promote this image of pan-Arab nationalism. I'm supporting all these different groups because I have this grand plan. So what you find is eventually Israel launches a unilateral war on Egypt and Syria in 1967. So the Egyptian pilots are not even in their fighter jets and Israel's already bombed them. They do the same in Syria. So America has to make a choice now.
No, so hold on. This bombing is surprise attack.
So 1967, Israel starts the war. Okay. Israel launches a unilateral war. Egypt's completely surprised. Syria's completely surprised. In fact, so they famously call it the 6-Day War.
Yeah.
Right? So America has to make a choice now because in the 57 war, when Israel went to war, America stopped them. America threatened Israel.
No, but let me ask you this, Sheikh. When Israel does attack in 1967, I mean, did they think that they're actually able to challenge both Egypt and Syria at the same time?
No, so their view is this is existential. We have got threats from nations in the region. If we need to survive, we need to start the war. We can't wait. They saw it as this is an existential battle. This is about will we survive or will we not survive? This was not some skirmish. It's not a tactical war. It's a strategic war. So their view was, if you look at Israel, you've got a border with Lebanon, you've got a border with Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. You've got 4 countries. If you're going to survive, you've got to deal with these 4 countries. And their view is with Nasser in power, there's no diplomacy, there's no negotiation. We're going to have to go to war. Right? With Jordan, we now know behind the scene they were always talking. So Golda Meir, she said that the Arab leader that was the closest to us was King Hussein. And remember, the Jordanian monarchy has always been in bed with the Israelis anyway. In Syria, because there were too many changes in power, they thought, okay, probably we're going to have to go to war with Jordan, with Syria as well. So they decided in 1967 to unilaterally launch a war. There was obviously tension going on in the sea and the ocean, all these sort of things. So they decided to go to war. And remember what they've done here, because this is something similar to what Pakistan did in 1965. Both Pakistan and Israel joined America in the Cold War. America armed both nations. And America told both nations, this equipment we've given you is for the Cold War. It's not for your own wars. But America knew Israel's got a problem with Egypt and Syria. America knew Pakistan has a problem with India. Both in Pakistan and Israel decided the best way for us to develop quickly is to join the Cold War. America's saying these weapons we're giving you, these tanks, these fighter jets, this military alliance is for the Cold War against the Soviet Union, not for your own individual interest. Mm-hmm. Both countries go to war using American equipment to deal with their own particular interests. So Pakistan goes to war with India in 1965. America puts sanctions on it afterwards. How dare you use our equipment for your war? Our equipment is for the Cold War. When Israel goes to war, America has to decide, what do you do now? Do you give Israel slaps and say, how dare you? Or can America achieve some other objective? So what America realizes is all of Israel's military is kitted out with American equipment. The Syrian and the Egyptian armies are kitted out with Soviet military equipment. Mm. So what America realizes, we can completely undermine communism in the Middle East. If Israel wins the war, if Egypt and Syria lose, what this shows you is American defense equipment is superior than Soviet defense equipment. So what America did was exactly what the British did in World War I. They used the Jewish plight for their objective. America used what Israel did for its own wider objective. Mm. So after 67 war, Gamal Abdel Nasser completely undermined. You've lost war against Israel, although he promoted that he won. And then obviously he died in 1970 anyway. In Syria, the Soviet presence in the Middle East had been undermined after 1967. It meant now, if your military has been developed by the Soviet Union, it can't stand up against America's military dominance. So then something else funny happened. In the 1967 war, Israel took over the Sinai. Israel took over the West Bank. Israel took over the Golan Heights. Israel started saying, we're the regional power. Israel got so arrogant, they said, we don't even need America anymore. We are now the power in the region. So America's got a problem now.
So hold on. So this is, it's not, look, now you're hearing in the news that Netanyahu is not listening. And that Netanyahu
nothing new.
Nothing new. Okay, so that's what I was trying to get to. So I guess, so there are, Sheikh, when we think of Israel, what kind of a state is this? The satellite state? Is it more like a state
Israel is
like Turkey? What is it?
No. So what you've got is it's a vassal for America. It's an agent for America. It needs American money, and it needs American equipment. It needs all of these things. Without that, it can't exist. But the Israelis realize that America's poured so much money into them that they can use some of this to their advantage. So for so many years now, Israel has tried to do strikes on Iran. But that goes against American interests, so America gets involved. Even now, I mentioned to you before we did this interview, Antony Blinken, Secretary of State, every weekend is going to Israel.
Right.
Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, every weekend is going to Israel. National Security Advisor for Biden, every weekend they're going to Israel. They're sitting in cabinet meetings. What they're doing, they're monitoring what Israel, because Israel is being genocidal. What is Israel saying? Israel saying we want to throw them into the ocean. We want to throw them into the desert. These guys are sitting in cabinet meetings to make sure Israel doesn't do action that go against America. But the challenge America has here, on one hand, you built Israel to be so powerful, the Arab rulers don't go to war with it. So the people think we have to accept Israel, we can't go to war with it. On the other hand, Israel does actions like a spoiled child. It gets arrogant. So if America undermines it, the people in the Muslim world will say, why do our rulers not attack Israel? Look, America's attacking them. So America's got a problem now. On the one hand, you don't want any attacks on Israel, you want to speak it up. On the other hand, if you make Israel to be too powerful, the Israelis start to believe we're too powerful, and then they do what they're doing now, bombing hospitals, bombing children.
I don't know if you saw, there was a interview by Jonathan Pollard. That this guy who was in, I guess for 30 years, he was in American jail. I mean, he recently did a podcast with one of these rabbis. And he said something that the movement of ships, the American ships in the region, is actually to make sure Israel doesn't go beyond its limits.
Yep.
And
this has happened once before.
So it's
in the
not,
1967 war, it happened. America sent a ship to monitor what Israel's doing, and Israel took the ship out. And what America concluded, if we sanction Israel now, it will undermine them so much that we can't use Israel for what we want to use it for in the region. So Israeli leaders time and time again say Israel is an aircraft carrier for America in the Middle East. So do you bomb your own aircraft carrier? You don't. So this is the liability. You have a spoiled child. What does a spoiled child do? He embarrasses you. He undermines you. He makes it out as though you need him. This is the liability. But remember, Israel is one outpost in the Middle East. America has good, deep relations with Egypt. It has good, deep relations with Saudi. America has other options. But for the moment, Israel is a good return on investment. That doesn't mean it's always going to be there. The only main difference really between the Israeli leaders and the Muslim leaders is Israel realizes without America, we can't exist. So we have to do what America wants. But at the same time, they still do things that they want to do. The Arab rulers, they don't do anything against America, but they want to keep their throne. Their throne is their priority. The Israelis have just concluded that if we want to survive as a people, we have to do this. The Arab rulers are, forget my people, I want my throne. If I go to war with Israel, that's a red line for America, my throne's gone. For the Israelis, it's not about their throne, it's about their survival as a people. That's the distinction between them. So what the Israelis have done, they do lobbying in America. They reached out to other people in America to get support. Our Arab rulers don't do that at all. They don't do no lobbying in America. They're mentally weak in the face of America. They go in like meek people. Is you give me an order, I'll jump. The Israeli leadership don't do that. But the fact that American officials are coming, sitting in their meetings, shows you who the real power is. Even in the Muslim world, America doesn't sit in cabinet meetings. But remember, you've created this military power.
But this could be because, well, also, if you're sitting in cabinet meetings, well, I guess that shows that U.S. is concerned that Israel could make independent decision.
No, and Israel does do that sometimes. And America generally covers it, or America undermines them in other ways. Israel is too useful. If you undermine Israel, the cat's out of the bag, you can't use Israel anymore. So what America tries to do is both things.
But
let's use them for what we need, but let's not undermine them as well. But there's a cost to that, and the cost is what you're seeing now.
So can Israel... Can they actually be independent, Sheikh, as a nation, whatever this?
No, so to be independent, they can't be this artificial nation. To be independent, they just have to they need to go to China or Russia. They can't be independent on their own because it's just artificial. You lack the economy, you lack water, you lack gas, you lack oil, you're such a small population, you got enemies around you. If the region normalize relations, then they can survive. But that's the thing. One nation in the region with Palestine, it can survive. But that's not, they're calling for just Palestine on their own. But for that, you're always going to need a foreign power. So before it was Britain, now
they want Israel on their own even,
Yeah. So that's why it's interesting. So after the 67 war, they got arrogant, the Zionists. They're like, we don't even need America anymore. We are the power in the region, right? We've grown so much. So 1973, the next war happens. So in 1973, you got two new leaders in Egypt and Syria. You got Anwar Sadat, very weak guy, nothing like Gamal Abdel Nasser. You got Hafiz al-Assad, who's come to power in a country that's prone to coups. So they both decide, we're going to launch a war against Israel. We're going to get back the land we lost. to build our power base and to secure ourselves. Their goal from the beginning was never to eliminate Israel. So Muhammad Haikal, famous journalist from the region, he said that when he spoke to one of the Egyptian generals, he said to him that this war is like a samurai with two swords, one big, one long, meaning we have limited objectives in this war. The war of 1973 was never to eliminate Israel. The Arab rulers have never gone to war with Israel to eliminate it. The 56 war was Suez Canal crisis launched by Israel, so they didn't even launch the war. 67, Israel launched the war, wasn't the Arab rulers. 1973, the Arab rulers launched the war. So they launched the war. Very quickly, Egypt gets across the Sinai. Very quickly, Syrians get into Golan. And very quickly, the Israelis realize our nightmare is about to come true. We're about to be annihilated. Now, Egypt and Syria can launch war on Israel proper. Right? So the Israelis go with the begging bowl to America. So remember, 5 years ago, they were saying, we're the regional power. We don't need America anymore. Now they go with the begging bowl to Kissinger. And Kissinger says, oh, now you come to talk to us.
But let me, just before you go, I just want to understand this relationship here. Kissinger is also a Jew. Was he a Zionist also?
No, so this is, I said to you before, we're one ummah. Your war is my war.
Yeah.
The Jews have never been like that. The Rothschild looked down upon the Jews. He wanted the Jews to leave Europe and go over there, but he didn't want them in Europe. He looked down upon them. The Jews have always been divided like that. The Jews, they're not a people. They're not a nation. They never have been. So that's why it's not surprising you'd find Jews who hate other Jews. Yeah. So Stephen Blinken's a Jew. Most of the American cabinet are Jewish. But they're going to stop Israel now launching a genocide. And there's a reason for this, which I'll come to, which is what's American interest, what's Israeli interest. They're not the same. Right? One's a global power, one is a country in the region. So 1973 war happens. The Israeli nightmare is there. They can see it. They're about to be annihilated. They go with the begging bowl to America. And America says, at the last moment, they're on the verge of being annihilated. America says, look, we've got no problem helping you. But we've got some terms. And the terms are, firstly, the land you took in 67, you've got to give it back. So the Sinai goes back to Egypt. The West Bank goes back to Jordan. And America says, in return, we guarantee you, we will get the Arab rulers to normalize relations with you. Right? The Israelis didn't like this at all. You've got no choice. You're about to be annihilated. So what America wanted to do was teach them a lesson. Without us, your long-term survival is not there. With us, you will survive in the long term. But if you want to survive in the long term, it's on our terms. It's not on your terms. So very grudgingly, the Israeli leadership had to accept it. You're on the verge of being annihilated. So America very quickly got a ceasefire and the war came to an end. This is 1973. In 1979, Egypt, the power in the region, the biggest threat to Israel, agrees to a peace treaty with Israel. But America delivers. America delivers on its promise. The Israelis aren't happy. They've had to give up land, right? And after the 73 war, America announces that the solution to this problem of the Palestinians and the Israelis is we need two states. Israelis never liked this idea. They've never liked it because the Israelis want Gaza and they want the West Bank. And let me explain something to you. If you look at the map,
this is 73. Palestine, this is 73, right?
Yep, 73.
Okay, go on.
Two-state solution, came after the 1973 war.
Okay.
What America's saying to the Israelis, you give back the Sinai, you give back the West Bank, we will have two states, and we guarantee you the Arab rulers will normalize relations with you. We will make them normalize relations with you. Right? And so if you think about it from an Israeli perspective, if Egypt normalizes with you, you now will survive. Okay, you're not happy, you've got to give up the West Bank. You're not happy, you've got to give up the Sinai. So they had to do a cost-benefit analysis.
Right? And the Golan never came back, Sheikh.
So we're going to come to this. What the Israelis did, they dragged their feet on some things.
Mm-hmm.
So once this was agreed, by 1979, famously, the Egyptian leader, Israeli leader, went to the White House and they signed the deal. Now, remember how important this is. The whole south of Israel has a border with Egypt. Egypt, the most powerful country in the region, has now agreed, we recognize you. The most powerful country has now recognized you. But Israel has actually got guaranteed security now because Egypt won't go to war with you now. In fact, Israel doesn't even have to put its army on the border of Egypt. Egypt is now a friendly country. Then in 1994, Jordan signed the treaty. So the 4 countries around you, 2 of them you're going to war with are now accepted you. Right? So America said there has to be 2 states, one Israeli state, one Palestinian state. Where the Palestinian state going to be? It's going to be in the West Bank. Now, this has always been a problem for Israel.
But West Bank was under Jordan at that time.
West Bank was under Jordan, but effectively Jordan had agreed that it can be. So the West Bank would either go to Jordan or become his own country. So they had agreed it can become his own country. Right? So if you look at the map of Palestine, the core of Israel, where all its population is from the north in Haifa. If you go down along the coast to Gaza, that's where their population is. If you were there, when you look at the West Bank is up in the mountains. The West Bank goes from the north of Palestine near to Gaza. It's a big land in the mountains. If that's a separate state with its own military and it's independent, they can fire a missile down at you. There's nothing you can do. If you want to survive as Israel, West Bank cannot be a separate country. You have to control the West Bank. Because you know the West Bank to the ocean is only 20 miles long, 20 miles wide. You won't survive in the long term. So the Israeli agenda from day one has been, is we don't want 2 states. So what they've been doing, they've been building settlements. Right. So when America said this is where the border is going to be, they're like, no, there's been a settlement there for 40 years. So what Israel's been doing is slowly, they've been pushing settlement. America's a global power. America's got goals and is busy in Asia, in Africa, in Europe. The Middle East is just one area for America. For Israel, the Middle East is everything. So America was busy in the Cold War in the 70s and the 80s. When the Soviet Union collapsed, America's busy with globalization.
Yeah.
Then in the 2000s, America gets to 2 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's a global power. It's got goals everywhere. Palestine is just one issue. For Israel, Palestine is everything. So that's why Israel's able to get away with things. Why? Because America has other things to do. What Israel doesn't do, it goes to the point where it affects America's interests. Where it affects America's interests, that's where America will intervene. So with Iran, it didn't care what Israel said. You are not going to war with Israel. When they did the nuclear deal with Iran under Obama, Israel was completely against this. They didn't care. America didn't care. American interests are more important than Israeli interests. Your job as Israel is to implement our interests. If you do that, we give a good standard of living, we will arm you, and we will protect your security. But that, as far as America is concerned, it doesn't give you the right to start interfering in America's other agenda. They try to sometimes, right? The only exception to this, I would say, Sheikh, is the neocons when they came to power. Because the neocons were Zionists as well. So they gave Israel a free hand to build settlements. Complete free hand. They didn't care what they did. And because they were at war in Iraq and Afghanistan, they wanted Israel to support the war effort. So this is the problem Biden's got now. Biden wants to become president. If you want to get a second term, you have to have the Jewish support. So what is he doing here? He's telling Israel, you have the right to defend yourself, we will help you. If Israel goes too far, Blinken, Lloyd Austin, they're there to make sure they don't go too far. This is the problem of having Israel as your agent. You can't undermine it because that then contradicts what you've done for all these years. On the other hand, because you build it up, the Israelis get arrogant. So America has to find other ways to contain Israel. And that's where Egypt, Saudi, these countries come in because they're powerful as well. I would argue, actually, Saudi is probably more useful for America than Israel is a liability. It costs. You got to give it aid. You got to build its military. Saudi, it buys. Saudi has oil. But Israel is today what the Crusader state was at the time of Saladin Ayyubi. It's an outpost for these guys. It's European, it's Western, it's like, I mean, it made me laugh when they say it's the only democracy in the Middle East. Yeah? Well, Germany was a democracy in the Middle East.
Go on.
No, but Germany was a democracy when Hitler came to power. That's neither here or there. Just because you're a democracy doesn't mean anything. Well, if the democracy is you've got these right-wingers in your government who are genocidal, well, fine. Yeah? So once Egypt did this peace treaty, unfortunately, it killed the Palestinian liberation struggle because the Palestinians were relying on the Arab nations, the Arab rulers to help them. So as a result, unfortunately, the Palestinians then turned to the PLO, they turned to groups. The PLO completely sold out. Well, the PLO tried to do a violent struggle. They concluded very quickly it's not going to work. But then they entered into negotiation with Israel. So they first started to call for the whole of Palestine, then 1967 Palestine, then a small percentage of 1967 to the point that they're completely sold out. So by 1987, without any hope, Hamas emerged because the PLO had completely sold out. Hamas entered into wars. It became the leader in the Gaza Strip, didn't really achieve much. And in 2017, even Hamas changed its charter. It said that we're only now debating 1967 onwards, not before. Even Hamas has lost all. So after Egypt, 1979, Hamas, Hezbollah, PLO, they don't represent an existential threat to Israel. They represent an economic threat, a security threat. Israel's existence is not in question. So on the 6th of October, a day before the 7th of October, Netanyahu said, this is the most peaceful the region has ever been. He probably regrets that now. Saudi Arabia, the Sunni leader, is normalizing relations. If Saudi Arabia normalizes relations, there's no reason why nobody else will normalize.
Right.
Where the Palestinian struggle, it doesn't exist. West Bank is under control. The Gaza Strip is a prison. The 6th of October was in many ways the most perfect days for the Israeli. Saudi's normalizing. And there's no discussion about two states. In the discussions with Saudi Arabia, normalization, there's no talk about a two-state solution.
So, Sheikh, some people say, some analysts I was reading, they say that this was the deal in the so-called the deal of the century with Saudis, that there was no talk of two-state solution. And this happens October 7th because that was the only way for the Palestinians to come out and say, no, you can't do this.
Look, the Sauds, the Muslim rulers really have never cared about Palestine. They cared because it's public opinion you have to. Physically, they were never going to do anything. So that's why the Israeli negotiators are saying that they can see when they talk to MBS, he doesn't care about Palestine. He wants good relation with Israel. Israel has links into America. He was more interested in that. He didn't care about Palestine. Right? That's the reality. That's why you see that. It's 5 weeks. What the Arab rulers done? Lots of talk. What are they actually doing? So Hamas has said now that they're bitterly disappointed with Iran and Hezbollah. They've done nothing. It's been 5 weeks.
This will lead to what, Sheikh? Another negotiation? They can't. How long are they going to? Okay, let me ask you two questions here. One, can the resistance actually resist, keep on resisting? Is that even viable? Can it happen without anyone supporting them? And number two, is it in the interest of Hamas to continuously resist? Because there is no Islam there. It seems like, okay, it's... No,
so the only Islamic bit is, this is Palestine, it's blessed land.
Right. And the people are sincere inside.
Even if the Palestinian people weren't Muslim, they will still be doing what they're doing now because there's a foreign occupier trying to kill you. In this case, they happen to be Muslim. It's our land, we live it, and okay, it's blessed as well. So the resistance will continue. But the resistance, if you look at it from 1979, it's not been able to bring into question Israel's long-term survivability. So they can hurt Israel, they can make it difficult for Israel, but Israel's not worried about its existence. So if you think about it, Soviet Union were defeated in Afghanistan because America, Saudi, and Pakistan financed them and supplied them.
Yeah.
America was defeated in Vietnam because the Soviet Union and China supplied the Viet Cong. The Palestinian people can survive if a foreign power supplies them. At the moment, they're not. This is the problem. Now, public opinion is clearly why are the rulers not moving? Why are we not supporting the Palestinian people? Erdogan is coming out even more fiery because the people are actually demanding it. Don't get me wrong. You're seeing in Egypt, Sisi twice is given two speeches. One is, don't be silly,
right,
army cadets.
Stop being emotional.
You don't know what's going on. Don't be silly. Then he gives a speech in front of a glass panel. He knows people are seething, yeah? So, there is tension there, yeah? And again, the Israelis are making very clear what they think of the Palestinians. Massacres, hospitals, babies, churches, mosques. They're like, their agenda from the beginning has been, we want the whole of Palestine. We're going to annihilate, right? Now, obviously, it's not in American interests you allow for a genocide. So at some point, America will put, in fact, behind the scenes, they are putting their foot down. And in fact, the Israeli cabinet is so divided, I actually think the Israeli politician will intervene. Because already the families are saying, where's our hostages? Where's our families? What are you doing about that? So it's unfortunate that we are 2 billion people in the world. Non-Muslims are seeing, after World War II, all these definitions came in about genocide, what a genocide is. Yeah. And it was never again.
Ethnic cleansing, genocide.
In history, when they look back, people are going to ask, all of you guys were watching the genocide take place on TV, but nobody did anything. The Western countries came out and said they have the right to defend themselves. You're 2 billion people, you're 52 nations, you surround Israel, nobody did anything. Like, it doesn't make sense when you look at it like that. And the Israelis are like, I mean, I was reading today, they were saying that, on one baby, they found a copy of Mein Kampf, the Hitler's book. But the accusations are getting even more ridiculous. No, but Israel's run out of excuses for years.
So
nobody
that's what I'm saying.
Israel.
So Sheikh, where do you see? So you don't see this leading into okay. So Israel still does not feel an existential threat.
No. This is Hezbollah, Hamas are not existential threats.
So unless
they don't even have the capability.
Right, for a at least long-term war.
Think about it. If the Israeli military, if the Egyptian military crossed Sinai with their tanks, with their fighter jets, with their 500,000 army against 150,000 IDF soldiers, that's existential. Israel knows that. Israel has to make sure it never comes to that. But the action Israel is doing.
How is it making sure, Sheikh? And this is creating hell even for itself. So it doesn't feel, which means it's so free to do what it has it's been given free hand to do whatever it takes to, but see, okay, so where will the Gazans, they don't want them in Sinai. At least Egypt doesn't want them in Sinai. At least that's what they're saying.
Unfortunately, Egypt doesn't want them. And the Israelis are being very open. Look, they're human animals. They should go to the desert. The Arab countries should take them. It's not our problem. That's how the Israelis see it. And to the Israeli credit, they've been consistent. We don't want any Palestinians in our land. It's the problem of the Arab rulers. Yeah, they're doing exactly what the Europeans did to them. We don't want Jews in Europe. Go anywhere you want. They're doing exactly the same.
SubhanAllah.
They're doing exactly the same. So this is why, listen, in the 1973 war, King Faisal got the Muslim rulers together. They did an oil embargo.
Yeah.
Right? They did an oil embargo. They're not even going to talk about an oil embargo. Like 60% of the daily energy, oil, is in the Middle East. No talk of that. There's not even talk of arming the Palestinians. There's not even talk of, because there's actually an argument here. Because Israel is indiscriminately bombing people, people have the right to defend themselves, so we are going to supply them arms to defend themselves. Yeah? I was reading yesterday, 50% of Israel's oil comes from Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, and Nigeria. 3 Muslim countries. The oil from Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan, it comes through pipelines that go through Turkey. That oil is still going to Israel despite what Erdogan is saying. Erdogan is being anti-Israel in his speech. Actions,
There's nothing there.
Let the oil go. Water, they use the Jordan River. Jordan has access to that as well. Yeah, Egypt hasn't even. Egypt's saying we don't want the Gazan people. But now what you're seeing is a number of solutions are coming about. The Arab countries run Gaza. You got the UN, they run Gaza. You got Netanyahu saying no, Israel will do the security, right? You got talks of a ceasefire, which we haven't seen what the terms are for this now. So what will happen is there will be some sort of end, some sort of ceasefire. There'll be some sort of structure set up to manage Gaza. Biden will say, I help the Israelis. I deserve your vote. I got you Muslims a ceasefire. I deserve your vote. Yeah? Mm-hmm. This is not a... But if Iran wanted, it could become regional. If Turkey wanted, it could become regional. If Egypt wanted, it could become regional. But the rulers, that's not in their interest. So then, for them, that could lead to the end of their throne.
But Sheikh, so then 11,000 people killed, half of them 70, 60% babies. Done deal, happened, history.
I mean, look, this comes at an interesting time. Egypt has got economic problems. People are on the streets. Now you've got this going on. In Iran, people have been on the streets for over a year. And then this happens. In Turkey, Erdogan won the election, but the economic situation is not great. Mm. The Arab Spring happened 2011. All the reasons why people came on the streets, those reasons are still there and they're far worse. And now the rulers have shown their true colors when it comes to Palestine. The future doesn't look good for the rulers. Mm. Mm. Even if no physical action comes out of this, but public opinion, the movement is against the rulers. Because the next time round, which is probably in Ramadan, because Israel always does something in Al-Aqsa during Ramadan, the problem is you can't guarantee someone won't do something. Yeah. Because public opinion. Because what happens with this scenario, if the rulers aren't going to do anything, then somebody else will do something about it.
Right.
And America, who's in election year, America, who's domestically polarized, might find it's got more important domestic issue than dealing with something internationally. So Israel may win this war, but it can now only lose. So they may win this. They may get Gaza. In the long run, you are only losing. And what we need to take from this is we may lose a battle or two. Salahuddin Ayyubi didn't win his first battle, but he won the war. Mm. Right? And Israel can't survive without the regional rulers accepting, normalizing, and leaving it. So, famously, a sheikh said that, the Arabs, they're the shadow of Israel.
Right.
If you get rid of these rulers, Israel ceases to exist. So, yes, it looks brutal, it looks bad, and it is bad. But Israel goes this far because of how insecure it is. Israel is not operating from a situation of strength. It's not operating from a position of we're strong and we're secure. This is Israeli insecurity. This is what leads them to do this, kill babies. You're threatened by babies. That's how insecure you are. So when this war finishes, they're not going to be secure. They're going to be like, oh, whoosh, we survived this one, but when the next war come from? Where the next threat coming from?
Mm. And you never know what the next one could be the last one. Mm.
So this is the Israeli view. Every threat potentially is existential. If Egypt loses a war, it's not the end of Egypt. If Jordan loses a war, it's not the end of Jordan. They've got big populations. If Israel is close to losing a war, it's the end of Israel. So they don't sleep easy at night, even when they win a war, because they're artificial country. So if you think about the long-term solution, yeah, before the British came in 1917, Muslims, Jews, Christians lived side by side. Jews went to their synagogues, Christians went and prayed. We worked together, there wasn't a problem. Islam was applied over the whole region. People lived in their communities. They got on with it. Then the British came. And then the Zionists came, and now they implement an apartheid system. That apartheid system discriminates against Muslims, and it doesn't even give security to the Jews as well. And that's why you find, Sheikh, there are many Jewish scholars out there that say that the reason why Judaism even exists today, because it was on the verge of extinction when Islam came. The Europeans had completely annihilated it. Islam came, recognized Judaism, gave them rights, and allowed them to prosper in the Islamic lands. So they say the reason why Judaism still exists today was because of Islam. So that's why our history is not one of genocide. It's not a massacre. It's we live side by side with these people. Many Jews made it into high office. Many of Jews made it into important positions. We don't have a problem with them. The problem with the Yahud are the Europeans because they were anti-Semitic. So what they try to do is label us Muslims like that. But our history is the complete opposite. When the Spanish Inquisition happened, where did the Jews go? They went to Istanbul. Their descendants are still there today. 500 odd years, their descendants are still there today. That's our history. So many Zionists, look, many Jews did experience anti-Semitism, and they were sold this dream that the solution to our problems is we seize territory in Palestine. Since that day, they've never had security. But Netanyahu comes and says, I will give you security. I will use the iron fist. They still don't have security. You will never get security if you take over somebody else's land. And look at your history. Ask Jewish Arabs how they lived. So their solution is you live with us. We aren't anti-Semitic. We've always had our history of living with them. So that's why we're not calling for the mass expulsion or the genocide of the Jews in Israel. What we're saying is there's people alive today whose lands were taken off them. We've lived side by side with you all our history. It's the Europeans who can't live with you. So what's interesting is, Sheikh, why did the Europeans not give them their own land? Why did they not give them a part of London? Why did they not give them a part of Philadelphia? But they say, oh, you should give up your land, Muslims, and give it to them. We don't have a problem. I mean, if they want to come and live it, this is the thing. If they had moved to Palestine, brought land, and lived there, not a problem. But that's not what happened. What they did was they seized land and they expelled the indigenous people. That's the problem. So if they were Hindus, if they were aliens, our response will still be the same, which is liberation. What they try to argue is, oh, because we're Jews, that's why you're against us. What that now means is if they were Hindus, we would have accepted it. You just happen to be, your deen is irrelevant. You've expelled, you've occupied, you're settler colonialists. That's the problem. You could have been an alien, it would have been the same outcome. Right? So these arguments you find, they don't wash anymore. We were here 2,000 years ago. We were victims of the Holocaust, so we have a right to do this. It doesn't wash anymore. So that's the unfortunate reality. So can you see, despite what's happened, we're not calling for a genocide. We're not calling for the mass expulsion of these people. What we're saying, your apartheid system, it doesn't work for you and it doesn't work for us. So what we need is a complete uprooting of what you're doing. There are people, 500,000 people alive today who can prove they were kicked out of their homes. So anybody, if I kick you,
for a final thought here, so you can probably, are you envisioning now the regimes? If it's not just now Israel that's insecure now, because the insecurities Israel is because the Arab regimes or the Muslim regimes in general, these whatever cartoonic states, they are now feeling threatened in their own homes. This is what's happening now. The streets are burning.
What they're finding is the sentiments of the Ummah over here, and they are completely on the opposite side, the rulers. When you have that, you have a problem. It basically means people can see you're actually not representative of us. You don't even believe or feel the way we're feeling.
Yes.
And that's a problem. That's when you get change. That's when you get upright. That's when you get revolution. That's when you have, we hate you, we don't like you, you don't feel like us. You don't hurt like us. Yeah. Well, what's European history? European history is revolution after revolution because the king didn't care about the people. The king wasn't representing the people. That's European history. That's the history our rulers are facing today. The only reason these guys are in power is because they have a supply chain that goes all the way to Washington, London, and Paris. They are not in power because they have a strong link with their people. They are not in power because the people see them as their ruler. They're in power because the West have put them there and then they oppress the people to stay in power. The people have had enough. They showed you in the Arab Spring that they're prepared to rise up. And now they've taken another blow, which is actually on Palestine, which for years you said you supported. Really, you don't. Like, where's Iran? Hassan Nasrallah said last week in a famous speech, if this goes beyond Gaza, then there's a problem. Also, 10,000 people dying in Gaza isn't a problem for you.
Right.
Only if it goes beyond Gaza. And that's why Hamas said they were bitterly disappointed with Iran and Hezbollah's response. They probably assumed if we're in the same game, if we launch a war on one side, you launch a war on the other side. And they've learned the hard way, actually, you're not in the same game.
Yeah.
These guys pick and choose what game they're in, and this isn't the game they're in.
Right. I mean, they've very problem with Hamas or these resistance people, Sheikh. Politically, they're so unaware of things. They don't understand regional issues. They don't understand how this game is played, and they always get played because of this. But, we hope at least this time, I think what really happened is that the Muslims, sincere Muslims, and even people who had some type of a benefit or doubt for these rulers, they saw the reality beyond any clear, Inshallah, Sheikh, inshallah.
I mean, for the first time after a very long time, I've seen people shocked and questioning.
Yes, I mean, people are beyond belief. Yeah, we would have hours of discussions on these things, saying, what do you see with this guy, man? Oh, brother, you guys everybody, you criticize everyone. And
Erdogan he was Iron Man. Nothing could touch him. Nothing could stick.
Yeah. And now we see.
Now people.
But I guess the exposing also had to happen, Sheikh, for the Muslims to see reality. Sometimes it's just when you have doubts in your head, you don't plan properly. And so now I think the Muslims everywhere will be doing nothing but plotting and planning, trying to figure out. I'm telling you, Sheikh, this is everywhere now. How is this happening? How can you kill so many babies and still get away with it? And the worst thing will be when there is no one taken accountable after all of this is over. That will burn even more than...
Yeah. I mean, look, in the UK, people still haven't forgiven Tony Blair for the Iraq War. Everywhere he goes, it's been years now, people still remember the Iraq War that he lied. Yeah? So our rulers, people seeing babies. I mean, I've seen people who are not even political. They're like, no, this is hang out. Well, non-Muslims. I mean, we went to a protest the weekend. You got non-Muslim families, children. Why are you coming out? Why? Because human welfare. There's people being massacred. This is wrong. This is bang out of water.
Yeah.
That's the scenario we're in here. That non-Muslim. Look, if these people weren't Muslims, we will still feel, look, humanity, these people are being killed.
Kids for, man. Yeah, children.
This is it. So if you look at it, all the actions they're doing in the long run will lead to questions of their survival. They think we're showing we're strong. We're showing the domestic population that we're strong. And look, for years, America got blowback. For years, America supported dictators, they got blowback. And this is what's going to happen. And that's why, with or without Hamas, the Palestinian liberation struggle will continue, because it is fundamentally an occupation. It's the expulsion of the people. And what you do is you push back, you rebel, you enter into liberation struggle. So whether it's Hamas or someone else, that struggle will continue. Hamas hasn't been there from the beginning. It only came in 1987. The struggle started before that. It started before Hamas, and it will last longer than Hamas. And that's why killing Hamas, the objective of the military operation to get rid of Hamas, it doesn't solve the underlying problem at all. It's still going to remain because it's an occupation.
All right, Sheikh. Let's end it here. Subhanallah. First of all, this is Jazakallah khair for the details. This is, I think, Allah Jazakallah khair. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect, preserve you, Sheikh. This is unbelievable, the details that we went into. And I really hope and pray that whoever is listening to this and watches this I myself will probably go back and I'm going to watch this over and over, because of the amount of details that you put into this, Sheikh. Subhanallah, Jazakallah khair. Because, this is the type of stuff, I think, especially for the coming generations. Whoever watches this, the 15-year-old, the 12-year-old, the 9-year-old, they will watch this and they will have clear understanding of where the so-called state of Israel came from and what this conflict is, Hamas or no Hamas, and what occupation means, and the role of the Muslims in this. And so, subhanallah. Once again, Sheikh, Jazakallah khair for your time.
No problem.
May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect and preserve you. And for the rest of you, brothers and sisters, whoever is watching, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the means and the understanding and clarity, tawfiq, to do what needs to be done after watching all this type of treachery taking place against our brothers and sisters in Gaza and everywhere else. I mean, we are just talking about Gaza, of course, but remember, there is still Kashmir, there is Uyghur Muslims, there is Rohingya Muslims, there is Muslims that are struggling everywhere, and it's no end to it because of treachery after treachery. All right, brothers and sisters, we'll see you next time, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
لن يطول الظلام ديننا لن يضام نحن جيل الهمام نحن فينا عمر لا 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 لن يطول الظلام ديننا لن يضام نحن جيل الهمام نحن فينا عمر صبح بدا نور ظهر نجم وشمس وقمر ألقى على الدنيا الدرر هذا عمر هذا عمر كل البرايا تنتظر أيامه البيض الغرر كي تستفيد من العبر هذا عمر هذا عمر لا لن تدوم الجراح بل سيأتي الصباح نحن أهل الكفاح نحن فينا عمر لا لن تدوم الجراح